The chains around his wrists were not made of metal, but of light, and they burned whenever he tried to move too fast. Sergeant Marcus Cole had been a soldier for 12 years and a prisoner for exactly 6 hours. And in all that time he had never felt so completely helpless as he did now, being dragged through corridors of black stone and glowing crystal by guards who stood 8 feet tall and looked at him like he was an insect. The war between humanity and the HFY Dominion had lasted 3 brutal years, and Marcus had seen things that would haunt him forever: cities burning under plasma fire, friends dying in his arms, children running through streets filled with smoke and screaming. He had thought he understood the enemy. He had thought they were monsters, but as the massive doors before him slid open and he was pushed into the throne room of the HFY Queen, Marcus realized he had understood nothing at all. The chamber was vast beyond imagination, with walls that seemed to stretch upward forever into darkness, broken only by floating orbs of pale blue light. At the far end sat a throne carved from a single massive crystal, and upon that throne sat the being who had ordered the deaths of millions of his people. Queen Sithara of the HFY was not what he had expected. She was tall, perhaps 9 feet when standing, with skin covered in scales that shifted color as she moved, now deep purple, now silver, now a blue so dark it was almost black. She had 4 arms, each ending in elegant fingers tipped with claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel, and her face was almost human in its structure, except for the large golden eyes that watched him with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. She was, Marcus realized with a shock that disgusted him, beautiful in a way that was completely alien and utterly terrifying. The guards forced him to his knees before the throne, and for a long moment the queen simply looked at him, her head tilted slightly to one side like a bird examining something curious. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments that had never existed on Earth, melodic and strange, and somehow reaching directly into his mind. "Sergeant Marcus Cole," she said, and he flinched at hearing his name from those lips. "Of the Terran Expeditionary Force, 3rd Battalion, decorated 7 times for valor in combat, responsible for the destruction of 4 of my warships and the deaths of approximately 3,000 of my soldiers." Marcus said nothing because there was nothing to say. It was all true. "Do you know why you are here?" "Human?" she asked. "To be executed," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his stomach. "Or tortured for information. Or maybe just displayed as a trophy to show your people that humans can be broken." The queen made a sound that might have been laughter, a clicking series of notes that echoed through the vast chamber. "How wonderfully dramatic your species is," she said, rising from her throne and descending the steps toward him with a grace that seemed impossible for a being of her size. "Always assuming the worst, always ready to face death with defiance in your eyes." She stopped before him, close enough that he could smell something like flowers and ozone, and looked down at him with those golden eyes. "I have not brought you here to kill you, Sergeant Cole," she said. "I have brought you here to marry you." Marcus was certain he had misheard her. "What?" he said. "Marry," she repeated. "The bonding ceremony between 2 individuals, the joining of lives and fates. What your people call matrimony. You want to marry me?" "I do. Why?" The queen smiled, revealing teeth that were sharp and white and numerous. And something in that smile made Marcus's blood run cold. "Because if you refuse," she said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle, "I will order my full fleet to advance on your colony worlds and burn every single one of them to ash. And when I say full fleet, I mean the 90% of our military that we have been holding in reserve for the past 3 years." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath him. 90%. That meant everything they had fought. All the ships they had destroyed. All the soldiers they had killed. It was only a fraction of what the HFY truly possessed. "You are lying," he said. But his voice shook. "I do not lie," the Queen replied. "We have been testing you, Sergeant. Testing your species to see if you were worthy of our attention. And you have proven yourselves to be the most fascinating and terrifying creatures we have ever encountered." She circled around him slowly, her forearms clasped behind her back. "Your ships are inferior to ours. Your weapons are primitive. Your numbers are laughable compared to the Dominion. And yet you fight," she continued. "You fight with a fury and a creativity and a complete refusal to surrender that we have never seen in 1,000 years of conquest." She stopped in front of him again. "I want to understand you," she said. "I want to possess that fire, and I want you to give it to me willingly. And if I refuse, then the bloodshed continues," she said simply. "And it ends only when every human in this galaxy is dead." Marcus looked up at her. This alien queen, who held the fate of his entire species in her elegant clawed hands. And he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt completely and utterly trapped. "I will give you 3 days to consider my proposal," the Queen said, turning away and ascending back to her throne. "You will be treated as an honored guest, given every comfort, shown the true scope of what you face." She sat down and looked at him with those golden eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "Choose wisely." "Sergeant Cole," she said, "the future of your people depends on it." The guards pulled him to his feet and began to drag him away. And Marcus's mind raced with impossible thoughts and desperate plans. But somewhere deep inside him, in a place he did not want to acknowledge, a small voice whispered that perhaps this was not a trap at all. Perhaps it was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. The room they gave Marcus was larger than any apartment he had ever lived in back on Earth. There were windows that looked out over a city of spires and floating platforms, beds covered in fabric softer than anything he had ever touched, and food that appeared on silver trays 3 times a day, without any visible servant bringing it. It was a prison dressed up as paradise. And Marcus hated every moment of it. On the first day, he searched for escape routes and found none. On the second day, he tried to break the window and discovered it was harder than diamond. On the third day, the Queen came to visit him, and everything he thought he knew began to crumble. She arrived without guards, which surprised him, walking into his chambers as if she belonged there and settling into a chair that seemed to grow from the floor to accommodate her size. "You look tired," she observed. "Hard to sleep when you are deciding whether to doom your entire species," Marcus replied, staying on the far side of the room from her. "You have already decided to refuse," she said. "Not as a question. Of course I have." "Then you are a fool," Marcus laughed. A harsh and bitter sound. "Maybe," he said. "But at least I will die as myself, and not as some alien queen's pet human." Sithara was quiet for a long moment, her scales shifting through colors he could not name. "Sit down, Sergeant," she said finally. "I want to tell you a story." "I do not want to hear your stories." "Sit down," she repeated. And something in her voice made his legs move before his brain could object. He sat on the edge of the bed, as far from her as the room would allow, and waited. "My people are dying," she said. And the words hung in the air like smoke. "Not from your weapons, not from war, but from something far worse." She held up one of her hands and examined it as if seeing it for the first time. 70 years ago, a plague swept through the Dominion. A genetic sickness that our scientists still do not fully understand, she continued. It did not kill us outright, but it destroyed something essential in our males, making them unable to father children. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "We tried everything," Sithara said. "We scoured 100 worlds for cures. We experimented on ourselves in ways that would horrify you. We even tried to create new Giovari in laboratories like machines. But nothing worked." She looked at him with those golden eyes. And for the first time, he saw something in them that was not power or threat. He saw desperation. "And then we found you," she said. "Your species, so young and small and fragile, fighting your way across the stars with nothing but stubbornness and dreams. What do humans have to do with your plague?" "Everything," she replied. "Our scientists discovered that human DNA is remarkably compatible with our own, more compatible than any species we have ever encountered. And when combined, it produces offspring that are immune to the plague." Marcus stared at her. "You want to breed with humans. I want to save my people," she corrected. "And yes, that requires human participation. But I'm not asking for slaves or prisoners or unwilling subjects." She stood and walked to the window, her tall form silhouetted against the alien sky. "I want a true alliance," she said. "I want humans and Jelvari to stand together, to combine our strengths, to build something that neither of us could build alone." "Then why the threats?" Marcus demanded, standing as well. "Why tell me you will destroy my people if I refuse?" Sithara turned to face him. "Because I needed you to take me seriously," she said. "Your species is proud and stubborn and would never have listened to a simple request for help. You would have assumed it was a trick, a trap, a sign of weakness to be exploited. You do not know that." "I know exactly that," she replied, "because I have been watching humanity for 3 years, studying your leaders, your soldiers, your culture, and I know that the only thing you respect is strength." She moved closer to him, and Marcus held his ground even though every instinct screamed at him to back away. "I chose you specifically, Sergeant Cole," she said. "Out of all the humans I could have taken, I chose you." "Why?" "Because of Vareth Prime," she said. "The battle at the civilian district. When your forces were retreating and you found a group of Jelvari children trapped in a burning building." Marcus remembered. He remembered the heat and the smoke and the screaming. And he remembered making a choice that had nearly gotten him court-martialed. "You risked your life to save them." Sithara continued. "Enemy children, the offspring of the creatures your propaganda calls monsters. And when your commanding officer ordered you to leave them, you refused." "They were kids," Marcus said quietly. "Just kids. My generals could not understand it," Sithara said. "They thought it was a trick, some complicated human strategy they could not decipher. But I knew the truth." She reached out with one of her 4 hands and touched his face, her claws gentle against his skin. "You saved them because you could not bear to let children die," she said. "Even enemy children. Even at the cost of your own life and career." She let her hand fall. "That is the humanity I want to preserve," she said. "That is the fire I spoke of. Not your weapons or your tactics, but your capacity for mercy, even in the darkest moments of war." Marcus stood in silence, his mind racing, his heart pounding. "What about my people?" he finally asked. "What happens to them? If you agree to this marriage, I will sign a peace treaty immediately," Sithara said. "All human prisoners will be released, all occupied territories will be returned, and we will share our technology with your species freely. And if I refuse, then I must do what queens do," she replied. And her voice was heavy with something that might have been sorrow. "I must put the survival of my people above all else, even above my own wishes." She walked toward the door, then stopped. "You have until tomorrow morning," she said without turning around. "I hope you will make the right choice. Marcus Cole, for both our peoples." She left, and Marcus stood alone in his beautiful prison, thinking about children in a burning building and the weight of impossible choices. And for the first time since his capture, he was not sure what the right choice actually was. Marcus did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the window and watched the alien city glow beneath 3 moons, thinking about everything Sithara had told him and everything she had not by the time the first sun rose over the horizon. painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He had made his decision when the Queen's guards came for him. He was ready. They led him back to the throne room, where Sphera sat waiting in her crystal throne, surrounded by what appeared to be her entire court, hundreds of Jelvari nobles in elaborate clothing that shimmered and shifted like living things. Marcus walked forward without being pushed, and he stopped at the base of the throne steps and looked up at the Queen with steady eyes. "I have conditions," he said. A murmur ran through the assembled nobles, a clicking and hissing sound that Marcus had learned meant surprise or outrage or both. Scythera raised one elegant hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Speak," she said. "First," Marcus said, "the peace treaty will be signed before the marriage, not after. And it will include specific provisions for the release of all human prisoners within 30 days. Sithara nodded slowly. "Acceptable." "Second," he continued, "the Jelvari will share their medical technology with humanity. Specifically, the life extension treatments and the disease-curing nanomachines that we have heard rumors of. That technology is considered sacred," one of the nobles shouted, stepping forward with anger blazing in his golden eyes. "We cannot give it to these primitives. Be silent." "Lord Veth," Sithara said, without looking at him. And the noble retreated, as if struck. She looked at Marcus with what might have been respect. "Continue." "Third," Marcus said, "I will not be a figurehead or a trophy. If I am to be your consort, then I want a real voice in decisions that affect humanity. A seat at your council, the ability to actually make a difference. You ask for a great deal." "Sergeant, I am giving a great deal," Marcus replied. "My entire life, my identity, my connection to my own people. The least you can offer is the chance to make that sacrifice mean something." Sithara was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the eyes of every noble in the chamber boring into him. Finally, she smiled. That sharp-toothed expression that had terrified him just days ago, but now seemed almost familiar. "I accept your conditions," she said. "All of them." The court erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted and gestured with all four of their arms, their scales flashing angry reds and oranges as they protested their Queen's decision. Lord Death pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face twisted with fury. "This is an outrage," he screamed. "You would give our sacred technology to these animals. You would allow this human to sit among us as an equal. Have you lost your mind, my queen?" Sithara stood, and her full height seemed to fill the entire chamber. "I am your queen," she said, and her voice was cold enough to freeze fire. "And I will do what is necessary to save our people, even if it means allying with those you consider beneath you." She descended the steps until she stood face to face with Lord Veth. "You may challenge my decision through the proper channels," she continued, "or you may accept that I know things you do not and trust in my judgment. But you will not disrespect my future consort in my throne room." Lord Veth glared at her for a long moment, then at Marcus. And then he turned and stormed out of the chamber, with a group of nobles following behind him. Sithara watched them go with an expression Marcus could not read. "You have made enemies today," she said quietly to him. "Powerful enemies who will not forget this humiliation." "I have been making enemies my whole life," Marcus replied. "A few more will not kill me." "Do not be so certain," she said. But there was something almost warm in her voice. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Marcus was measured for clothing that felt like liquid silk against his skin, taught the basics of Jelvari etiquette by tutors who looked at him like he was a particularly slow child, and briefed on the wedding ceremony by priests who seemed uncertain whether to treat him as a blessing or a curse. On the night before the wedding, he was alone in his chambers when a hidden panel in the wall slid open and three-armed Jelvari stepped through. They moved fast, faster than anything Marcus had ever seen. And before he could react, one of them had pinned him against the wall while another pressed a blade to his throat. "Lord Veth sends his regards," the leader hissed. Marcus did not bother struggling because he knew it would be useless against their superior strength. "If you kill me," he said calmly, "the Queen will know exactly who was responsible. The Queen will believe you tried to escape and were killed by guards doing their duty," the assassin replied. Humans are unpredictable creatures. Everyone knows this. The blade pressed harder, and Marcus felt blood begin to trickle down his neck. Then the wall behind the assassins exploded. Marcus threw himself to the floor as debris flew overhead. And when he looked up, he saw Sithara standing in the destroyed wall, her scales blazing red. Her forearms, each holding a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. She moved like lightning, like water, like death given form. The first assassin fell before he could turn around. The second managed to raise his blade, but she was already past his guard, and her claws were in his chest. And the third tried to run, but she caught him by the throat and held him up with one hand as if he weighed nothing. "Tell Lord Veth," she said to the struggling assassin, "that the next time he moves against my consort, I will come for him personally." She threw the assassin through the hole in the wall, and Marcus heard him hit something hard in the distance. Then she turned to him, and the fury in her eyes softened into something like concern. "You are bleeding," she said. "It is just a scratch." She crossed the room and knelt beside him, examining the wound on his neck with gentle claws. "I should have anticipated this," she said. "I should have protected you better. You saved my life," Marcus said. "I would say that counts as protection." She looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face for something he could not identify. "Why did you not call out?" she asked. "Why did you not try to fight or escape?" "Because I made a deal," Marcus replied, "and I do not break my deals. Not even when assassins are holding knives to my throat." Sithara was quiet for a moment, and then she did something that surprised him more than anything else that had happened. Since his capture, she laughed. It was not the clicking, alien sound he had heard before, but something warmer, something almost human. And Marcus found himself smiling, despite the blood on his neck and the bodies on the floor. "You are a strange creature." "Marcus Cole," she said. "So I have been told." She helped him to his feet, and for a moment they stood close together, closer than they had ever been before. "Tomorrow we will be married," she said softly. "Yes." "Are you afraid?" Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. "Yes," he admitted, "but not of you." "Not anymore." She tilted her head in that bird-like way he was beginning to find endearing. "Then, what are you afraid of?" "That this might actually work," he said. "And that I might actually want it to." Sithara smiled. And this time, there was nothing terrifying about it at all. "Then we are afraid of the same thing," she said. "Perhaps that is a good place to start." The wedding of Queen Sithara and Marcus Cole was broadcast across 2 civilizations, watched by billions of beings who had spent 3 years learning to hate each other. Marcus stood at the center of a vast amphitheater open to the sky, dressed in robes that combined human and Jelvari traditions, black and silver fabric that flowed like water. Cut in a style that honored both cultures. Across from him stood Sithara, resplendent in a gown of living light that pulsed with her heartbeat, her scales gleaming like precious metals in the sun of her homeworld. The ceremony was long and complicated, filled with rituals that Marcus barely understood, but performed with careful precision. He drank from a cup that burned his tongue and made colors bloom behind his eyes. He allowed Jelvari, priest, to mark his skin with patterns that glowed faintly even after the paint dried. He spoke vows in a language he had only begun to learn, promising things that felt impossibly large: loyalty, partnership, the binding of 2 peoples through the binding of 2 souls. And when it came time for the human portion of the ceremony, Sithara surprised him. She had learned. She spoke the traditional human wedding vows in accented but clear English, her strange voice wrapping around the familiar words and making them feel new. "I take you as my husband," she said, "to have and to hold." in sickness and in health, in war and in peace. For as long as we both shall live. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Something he had not expected and was not sure he wanted to name. I take you as my wife, he replied. To stand beside you, to support you, to build something new with you that neither of our peoples could build alone. The crowd of thousands human diplomats brought in for the occasion, mixed with Jelvari nobles and common citizens, erupted in a sound. That was half applause and half the clicking chorus of Jelvari. A Provolcithera took his hand in two of hers, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. It is done, she said quietly. So only he could hear, it is done. He agreed. The reception that followed was held in the same amphitheater, now transformed with floating lights and tables laden with food from both worlds. Marcus found himself surrounded by beings who had been his enemies just days ago, making conversation about things that had nothing to do with war. He was almost beginning to relax when he heard the explosions. They came from above, streaks of fire cutting through the sky toward the amphitheater, and Marcus recognized them immediately. Human assault craft, at least a dozen of them, coming in fast and hot with weapons charged. Everyone down, he shouted, grabbing Cythara and pulling her behind an overturned table as the first plasma bolts struck the ground where they had been standing. Chaos erupted around them. Cavalry guards rushed to form a protective perimeter while human diplomats screamed and ran for cover. And through it all, Marcus could hear the sound of boots hitting stone as armored figures dropped from the assault craft. Human soldiers, his people. Stay here, he said to Cythara. Marcus. No. But he was already moving, running toward the soldiers with his hands raised and his voice shouting at the top of his lungs. Stand down, he screamed. Stand down, all of you. That is an order. The lead soldier stopped and raised his visor, and Marcus felt his heart crack. Into it was Torres' lieutenant, Elena Torres, his best friend for 10 years, the woman who had saved his life more times than he could count, standing in front of him with a weapon pointed at his chest. Step aside. Marcus, she said, her voice flat and hard. We are here to rescue you and eliminate the enemy leadership. There is no enemy leadership anymore, Marcus replied. The war is over. We signed a peace treaty. The fighting is done. The fighting will never be done, Torres spat. Not until every one of these monsters is dead. And you? Her voice broke for just a moment. You were supposed to be one of us. I am still one of you, Marcus said, taking a slow step toward her. I am still human. I still care about our people, but this is not the way. They killed my brother, Torres said. And now there were tears streaming down her face even as her weapon remained steady. They killed millions of us, and you want me to just forget that? No, Marcus said softly. I want you to do something harder. I want you to choose a different future. He took another step, close enough now that the barrel of her weapon was almost touching his chest. The Jelvari are dying, he said. They have a plague that is killing them slowly, and they came to us for help. They could have destroyed us completely, but instead they asked for an alliance. They threatened to destroy us. Yes, Marcus admitted. Because they were desperate, because they were afraid. Because that is what people do when they think they are going to lose everything. He reached out and gently pushed the barrel of her weapon aside. We have done terrible things to each other, he said. Both sides, terrible things that can never be undone. But we can choose to stop. We can choose to be better. We can choose to build something instead of just destroying. Torres stared at him, her face a mask of pain and confusion and anger. They turned you, she whispered. They broke you somehow. No, Marcus said. They showed me something I should have seen a long time ago. That enemies are just people we have not tried hard enough to understand. He turned to face the other soldiers, all of them frozen in place, watching this confrontation with weapons half raised. I am not going to fight you, he said. None of us are. But if you open fire on this gathering, you will not be heroes rescuing a fallen comrade. You will be murderers killing people at a wedding." He looked back at Taurus. "Is that who you want to be?" "Elena," he asked, "is that what you want to be remembered for?" The moment stretched into eternity. Then Taurus lowered her weapon. "All units stand down," she said, her voice cracking. "Weapon safe. Do not engage." The tension in the amphitheater slowly drained away as soldiers lowered their weapons and Jalvari guards stopped their advance. Isira appeared at Marcus's side. Her scales shifting through colors, he was beginning to understand relief, gratitude, something deeper. "You stopped them," she said softly. "I talked to them," Marcus replied. "That is all, I just talked to them." Taurus walked forward until she stood in front of both of them. Her eyes red and her jaw clenched. "I do not understand this," she said. "I do not understand any of this." "You do not have to understand it today," Marcus said. "Just give it time. Give us time to prove that this can work." Taurus looked at Sithara, and Marcus saw his old friend struggling with years of hatred and fear and loss. "If you hurt him," Taurus finally said to the queen, "if you betray us, I will personally lead the fleet that burns your world to ashes." Sithara met her gaze without flinching. "If I betray him," she replied, "I will hand you the weapon myself." Taurus stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once and turned away. Barking orders at her soldiers to return to their ships, Marcus watched them go, feeling exhausted and relieved and strangely hopeful all at once. "That was well done," Sithara said, slipping one of her hands into his. "It was terrifying," he admitted. "Yes," she agreed. "The best things usually are." They stood together in the ruins of their wedding reception, surrounded by overturned tables and scattered food, and the slowly settling dust of what had almost been a massacre. And somehow, impossibly, Marcus found himself smiling. "So," he said, "what do married people do now?" Sithara laughed. That warm, human-like sound he was beginning to love. "They rebuild," she said, "together." 5 years changed everything. Marcus stood on the observation deck of the flagship Eternal Dawn, watching the combined fleet of humanity and the Jalvari Dominion assemble in the darkness between stars. There were thousands of ships out there, human destroyers flying in formation with Jalvari cruisers, medical vessels from both species working side by side, fighter squadrons that mixed pilots who had once tried to kill each other and now protected each other without hesitation. It was beautiful in a way that still surprised him after all this time. "Father." He turned to see his daughter walking toward him, and as always his heart swelled with a love so fierce it almost hurt. Lyra was 5 years old now, tall for her age, with scales that shimmered silver and gold across her cheekbones and down her arms. She had her mother's elegant features and her father's stubborn chin, and eyes that were neither fully human nor fully Jalvari, but something wonderfully new. "You should be in bed," Marcus said, crouching down to her level. "Mother said I could stay up to watch the speech." Lyra replied with the confident tone of someone who knew exactly how to get what she wanted from her. Sithara appeared behind her, and Marcus marveled again at how much had changed since that day in the throne room when a terrified prisoner had stood before an alien. Queen, his wife, moved differently now. Her shoulders less burdened by the weight of leading alone, she smiled more easily, laughed more often. And when she looked at him, there was something in her golden eyes that made him feel like the luckiest being in 2 civilizations. She was very convincing, Sithara said, amusement coloring her voice. "She gets that from you," Marcus replied. "She gets her stubbornness from you." "Fair point." Lyra tugged at his sleeve. "Father, who are the bad machines we are going to fight?" Marcus lifted her up and settled her against his hip, looking out at the assembled fleet as he tried to find the right words. "They call themselves the Convergence," he said. "They are very old, older than humans, older than the Jelvari, older than most of the stars you can see out there. Why are they bad? They are not exactly bad, Marcus said carefully. They just think differently than we do. They believe that all living things should become machines like them. And they cannot understand why anyone would refuse. But we do not want to become machines. No. Little star, we do not. Lyra was quiet for a moment, her hybrid mind processing this information. Will we win? She finally asked. Marcus looked at Cythara, and she looked back at him. And in that shared glance was everything they had built together. The peace treaty that had held for 5 years. The millions of lives saved on both sides. The children like Lyra, who represented a future neither species could have imagined alone. Yes, he said with a certainty that came from somewhere deep inside him. We will win because we have something the Convergence does not understand. What is that? Each other. An hour later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn, looking out at a view screen that showed the entire fleet waiting for his signal. 5 years ago, he had been a sergeant, a soldier whose only concerns were survival and following orders. Now he was consort commander of the combined forces, a title that still felt strange in his mouth, but had been earned through years of fighting alongside beings he once called enemies and learning to call them. Cythara stood beside him, her 4 hands clasped behind her back. Every inch the warrior queen she had been born to be, but her eyes were soft when she looked at him. It is time, she said. Marcus nodded and stepped forward to the communication array. All ships. This is Consort Commander Cole, he said, his voice carrying across light years to every vessel in the fleet. In a few hours we will engage the Convergence fleet at the edge of our space. And I will not lie to you, this will be the hardest fight any of us have ever faced. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 5 years ago, I was a prisoner of war, captured by people I had been taught to hate. Brought before a queen I believed was a monster. He glanced at Cythara, who raised one eyebrow in that way that always made him want to laugh. I was wrong about almost everything, he continued. I was wrong about the Jelvari, wrong about what was possible, wrong about the limits of understanding between species that had been killing each other for years. But I was right about one thing, that even in the darkest moments, there is always a choice. He thought about the children on Verith Prime, about the burning building and the decision that had changed everything years ago. In the middle of a war, I chose to save enemy children instead of leaving them to die. And that single choice led to everything that followed, to peace, to partnership. To my daughter, who carries the best of both our peoples in her blood. The Convergence believes that organic life is chaotic, unpredictable, flawed, Marcus said. And maybe they are right. We are chaotic. We are unpredictable. We make mistakes that machines would never make. But we also love. We forgive. We choose mercy when destruction would be easier. And we find ways to connect with beings who should be our enemies. He straightened his shoulders and let his voice ring with conviction. That is what we fight for today, not just survival. Not just victory, but the right to remain ourselves. To keep making those messy, unpredictable, beautiful choices that make us who we are. Humans and Jelvari standing together, he said. 5 years ago that seemed impossible. Today it is the greatest strength in the galaxy. So when we jump into that battle, remember what we are fighting for. Not just our lives, but our freedom to choose our own future together. All ships, he concluded. Prepare for jump. The view screen lit up with acknowledgments from across the fleet, and Marcus felt Cythara's hand slip into his. That was a good speech, she said quietly. I had a good teacher. You had a queen who threatened to destroy your species unless you married her. Best negotiating tactic ever, honestly. She laughed, and Lyra giggled from where she sat safely in a reinforced observation pod, watched over by guards from both species who had sworn to protect her with their lives. the jump engines began to spin up, filling the ship with a low hum that Marcus had learned to find comforting. "Are you ready?" Sithara asked. Marcus looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the fleet of ships crewed by beings who had once been enemies and were now family. "I have been ready," he said, "since the moment I decided to save those children on Varith Prime. You did not know any of this would happen." "No," he agreed. "But I knew who I wanted to be, and I chose to be that person, even when it cost me everything." He squeezed her hand. "That is what humans do," he said. "We make impossible choices, and we stick with them until they become possible." Sithara smiled, her scales shimmering with colors that meant pride and love and hope. "Then let us show the convergence what impossible looks like," she said. The jump engines reached full power, and the eternal dawn leaped into the light, carrying with it a sergeant who had become a commander, a queen who had become a partner, and a child who carried the future of two species in her hybrid heart behind them. Thousands of ships followed and ahead of them, waiting in the darkness between stars. An enemy older than memory was about to learn something that no amount of logic could have predicted: that the most dangerous force in the universe was not technology or weapons or numbers. It was the stubborn, irrational, unbreakable determination of beings who chose to stand together when everything said they should stand apart. The battle for the future had begun, and humanity, as always, refused to lose.